Hello, students of Johnson University's The Theology of the Trinity class. I am your instructor and lecturer, Dr. David Russell Mosley. So I wanted to make one last video response to something that I saw coming up. It's got two things, but they're related, that I saw coming up in the forum posts. So, on the one hand, many of you, in part because you struggled with admittedly outdated translations of 4th century texts, felt like you couldn't, you said you'd never be a theologian, that you'd never be someone who could explain the deep things of the faith. And others of you then also called into question, why do we need all of this stuff? Why do we need to go into these arguments? Why isn't it enough to just have faith? To just believe that God is God and leave it at that. And so I wanted to just respond to those two things as briefly as I can. So first, on the theologian side of things, there are a couple of things that I think are very important to note here. First, particularly for those of you who are going into ministry, is it important, and that's any kind of ministry, vocational ministry, I mean here. Of course, all of us, whatever we're doing, it's some kind of ministry, but for those who are going to work for the church, whether that's in worship ministry, whether that's in youth ministry, preaching ministry, counseling in a church, counseling out of a church too, obviously, but I'm specifically thinking of people who are going to work for, be paid by a church. It is immensely important not to have that attitude. Because if you come into it with that attitude, you're going to leave a lot of your congregation, a lot of the people whom you work with questions and dissatisfaction that, if my minister doesn't know the answers to these, or if they don't even think that they think that these questions are way above their pay grade, how on earth am I going to understand them? So, theological questions are very important, and they're very important for our ministers to wrestle with and try to understand. Because if you're not trying, if you feel like, I'll just leave that to the academics, and I'll just preach the Bible, or I'll just do my youth ministry, or I'll just lead worship and leave all these questions aside, and not even attempt to engage them, that's not going to be good, especially if you end up at a church in some small town that doesn't have any theologians in it. So you need to be open to engaging with these things. I'm not asking you to have the same kind of understanding that I have about this stuff. You may not be called to that. You might be called to be academic theologians and ministers, but you might not. And especially if you feel called to the ministry, it's a higher likelihood that you're not called to also be an academic. And that's fine. But you need to be open and willing to work through this stuff. And that's particularly true because of what it actually means to be a theologian. See, I feel like probably most of you, when you hear the word theologian or when you think of theology, you merely think of it as an academic discipline. It's something where you read what are potentially to you dry and boring books about topics that you think are super esoteric. They're super up here in the air, super theoretical, have nothing to do with how I live as a Christian, with my faith, my daily faith in Jesus Christ. And I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that there aren't theologians who more often than not function that way. And I'm not even going to tell you that the stuff that is up here is always bad. That it's not bad that theologians are doing stuff that doesn't always appear to have direct impact on how Joe Christian is going to live his life tomorrow. as he goes to work. Because part of what theologians are often trying to do is to understand as much as we can what's going on in creation, what's going on, who is God, and how does he interact with us, and on very deep levels that not every Christian does need to investigate. But that at its core is not what it means to be a theologian. That is what it means often to be an academic theologian, to be a scholar, or to be someone who is vocationally a theologian, whether or not they get paid for it or whether or not they write books. But at the end of the day, what it really means to be a theologian, this is one of my favorite definitions. It comes from a 4th century a theologian called Evagrius. And it's, to paraphrase it slightly, it's, he who prays truly is a theologian. And if you are truly a theologian, you will pray. So at the end of the day, being a theologian is being engaged with God. At the end of the day, that's what it means to be a theologian, is that you are one who prays. That you are one who is preparing yourself, and if you're in ministry particularly, or if you have a family, helping prepare others for the resurrection. Prayerfully, thoughtfully, contemplatively. That is what it means to be a theologian. So don't sell yourself short. Yes, these texts are hard to read, especially the translations that I've assigned, and I recognize that. That's why, if you've wanted to buy the better translation of Augustine, I sent you the links. Everyone else that we read after Augustine, we're reading either the best translations that are there, or they've written in English. Because our 2 weeks on Aquinas, that's one of the, it's about as readable as you're going to get with Aquinas. And then after Aquinas, we're dealing with people who were writing in the 20th century. And so all of them either wrote in English or were translated into English much more recently. So I recognize that. And even in the best possible English, these texts are hard. We're reading deep stuff here. But don't sell yourself short. Try. Really try, and remember that what it really means to be a theologian is to be a person who is engaged with the Holy Trinity. To be a person who is engaged with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit every day. And for the other stuff, the high esoteric stuff, we'll get into some of how that might affect everyday life in the last week. Okay, so I've covered that really quickly. The whole, why can't we just have faith? Why do we need to talk about these things? Why we need to talk about these things is because it matters. Because it makes a difference. In the last video, I touched on this a little bit, but consider that if we have a wrong opinion, one of you, I remember, did say something along the lines of, having wrong opinions about God isn't going to cause you to lose your salvation. So if you don't perfectly understand the Trinity, you're not going to not be saved. And to an extent, I do believe that. But I also believe it's possible to have wrong enough ideas about God where you might not be saved. Where, if you don't think that Jesus is God, that's a pretty wrong idea. Because if he's not God, then how on earth are we saved? So these things matter just on that level. It matters that we understand what we mean when we say God, and why, when we say God, it can be the same as what Jews and Muslims mean when they say God, and it can also be very different. It's what it means, why, we can mean some of the same things when we say Jesus Christ, as Mormons do, but why that's also very different. And there, the difference, I think, is actually even greater than a Jewish or Muslim understanding of God. The Mormon understanding of who Jesus is, or the Jehovah's Witness understanding of who Jesus is far, far starker than the difference between what Muslims mean when they say God and what Jews mean when they say God. So these things matter just on that level. But they also matter in how we live our lives. They matter. And like I said, we'll talk more about that in the last week, but I need you to know that these things do matter. That the church thought that they mattered an awful lot. And often, why these things are coming up, the texts that we're reading, they're being written because people were saying things that were not correct. They were saying things that the church hadn't believed at any point. They're coming up with new ideas about who God is, about who Jesus is, going against what was commonly believed and what was preached through the liturgy in the early centuries. And so that's why these texts come out. That's why Gregory is dealing with these issues, because there are actually people in his day who are saying, no, it isn't like that. It's like this. No, Jesus isn't co-eternal, co-powerful, homoousios with the Father. He's created by the Father. That matters. That makes a huge difference in what we believe and in what we teach and in how we live. So I just want to leave you with that. These questions matter. If they didn't, I wouldn't be teaching it. I can promise you that. If these things didn't matter, if they didn't change how I live my life, I wouldn't be teaching it. Okay? All right. That's all I wanted to say. God bless you all. I look forward to seeing your discussions about Augustine's text. Really quickly, assuming that you do watch this before you've written your forum post, if you've decided that you wanted to buy the better translation and you've used that, or actually, I think, today I will try and make, I'm not making any promises because it is an awful lot and this will take quite a bit of time, and I don't have a great scanner and I don't have a university office and scanner that I can use to do this, but if I can, I will try to make scans of this so that everybody can use the better translation of Augustine. But if you are using it, please signal that you're using the newer translation, just so that your fellow classmates who aren't using it don't look at it and think, well, that doesn't look anything like mine. So just signal that you're using the newer translation. But hopefully that won't matter. Hopefully I'll be able to get you guys scans of everything and it'll be fine. Okay? All right. That's it for real this time. God bless. I will talk to you all later.